preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. I'm Annette Insdorf, and I'm very happy to welcome you this evening to the second part of the series on American politics and film. The year 1968 has a special resonance for my generation. As I look back, those of us who were in colleges and high schools at the time, we were very idealistic, perhaps naive, believing that the problems of the American system could be changed from within. I was one of the many young people who was working for Eugene McCarthy, who was then running for the presidency on the Democratic ticket. And the film that we're about to see therefore has a kind of special poignancy for me, and I hope for you, as it traces the campaign of this poetic politician. America is Hard to See was directed in 1970 by Emile D'Antonio, one of our foremost political documentarists. He also made Point of Order in 1963 about the Army Joe McCarthy hearings, and we'll be seeing that here on July 28th. And he directed Millhouse in 1971, a rather satiric look at Richard Nixon. And now, I hope that you enjoy America is Hard to See. Good evening. My name is Annette Insdorf. I'd like to welcome you to the second evening of American Politics and Film at the 92nd Street Y. The Last Hurrah was made in 1958, coincidentally the same year that John Lindsay, our guest speaker tonight, was first elected to Congress. It was made by John Ford, one of the greatest directors in American film history. He made approximately 100 films beginning in the silent era, and they include such classics as Stagecoach, The Grapes of Wrath, The Informer, How Green Was My Valley, The Searchers. Although he excelled in Westerns, almost all of his films are meditations on the American past and on the timeless themes of justice, honor, bravery, and unity. I think it's important to know that John Ford was very much Irish, very much a Catholic, and I think you'll feel these things in The Last Hurrah. His films are often elegies, not only the Westerns, they commemorate the individuals who created America. Like Howard Hawks, the other great American director to whom he's often compared, John Ford was really interested in male groups, in the kind of professional camaraderie. And he was also interested in flawed or abrasive heroes. No wonder he was attracted to The Last Hurrah, a classic in American political fiction written by Edwin O'Connor. And Boston Mayor Skeffington was based on the actual person of James M. Curley. And as you'll see, Spencer Tracy plays this salty Irishman to the hilt. The idea of an era passing or of old values yielding to the new also attracted Ford throughout his career. Some of you may have seen The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, where we find John Wayne playing the old typical man of the West, the man of the gun, who in the course of the film has to yield his autonomy and authority to the new order, to the man of the East, incarnated by James Stewart, the man of the book, the lawyer. And we feel this kind of nostalgia for a West in which there's no more room for this kind of old crusty hero. The Last Hurrah transposes this kind of feeling into the American political domain. And we'll also see here the idea of glory and defeat or noble failure, which characterized many John Ford films, including They Were Expendable. I should also add that you'll recognize a few character actors that are very memorable, like Basil Rathbone, Sherlock Holmes himself, Pat O'Brien, and John Carradine. Tonight, we won't be taking questions written from you, but rather, when we come back with John Lindsay, we'll take questions directly from the floor. Enjoy the film. And also 2 terms with the Eisenhower administration in international work. His relationship to the American party system is a fascinating one. He was a Republican mayor, and when he ran for a second term in 1969, he lost the Republican primary, but went on to win the general election as a Liberal Party candidate. In 1971, he joined the Democratic Party. When he ended his second term in 1973, John Lindsay returned to private life and private practice, the same firm as when he left Yale, but he has continued to be visible to us as an author of books, articles on urban affairs, and a contributor to ABC Television and Channel 13. Please join me in welcoming John Lindsay.
Well, you'll forgive me if I pull out some notes I've been sketching on as I re-looked at this wonderful film that I'd seen for the first time, I guess back in, when was it, 1958 when it was
That's right.
done? A superb movie. It's hard for me to believe that it's in black and white. It shows you how old it was, and it was filmed the first time that I ever ran for public office back in 1958 when I ran for the House of Representatives. I was there for 4 terms, not 4 years.
Oh, sorry. It's the problem when you're a film historian instead of a political one.
But it gives you some idea of how far back that was in point of view of film history. It's a very good movie, done with superb production and direction and good casting, with still a legendary figure in the making of movies in Ford. And yet I doubt if it's a film you'd make today. I don't think it would go today. If you did it from scratch, exactly the same, and released it, it wouldn't work. And that's because the world goes on, life goes on, it's a different situation. And just like that's a black and white film, which was a different world in film, so the world of politics then was a different world and a different thing. You see the mayor, Skeffington, being beaten. You don't know why he's beaten. You get a glimpse of it, or a hint of it, I suppose, by the fact that he's beaten by a ninny, a cipher. You get a hint of it when you see all the lights of the television there, and you see his opposition looking at the screen. So the modern day is there. Well, I guess my first real work in the campaign was when Senator Ives ran for governor after Governor Dewey had quit, and it was the first time I really saw television working hard at the business of campaigns. And now that goes back to 1954. So that shows you how short a time it's been. Of course, it's very difficult to believe that Spencer Tracy could be beaten by television under any circumstances by a candidate who was a zero. And yet, on the other hand, now we have a movie actor who's president, so anything can happen. There are some very touching scenes that bring back very close memories to me, going to the wake. Good heavens, and particularly in the days representing this district right here, running from 110th Street to the bottom of the village and over to Columbus Avenue. In those days, it's a different district now, containing very wonderful, stable, ethnic communities, very heavily Catholic, some of them. I don't know how many wakes I used to go to, and they were meeting halls. They were places where people came, and the widow or the surviving family loved it. It was part of their lives. It had to have been, whether they liked it or not, but it was. Of course, in this film here, both the mayor and the cardinal grew up in an area where they made it into an established world through religion, the other through politics. Now, I wonder whether that's so true today, where wealth and expense counts for so very much, as well as the possibility of electing people who are packaged. Mayor Skeffington is a person of flesh and blood. You know him. You like him or you don't like him. He's old-fashioned in his way, and he has an old-fashioned code about him. He gives away the turkeys at Thanksgiving. Now they dispense the turkey during the campaign. It's called the candidate. That's shortcut. That's shorthand for leading me into the point which I think is the message of the movie without it being explicit in the movie at all, which is that it is possible to destroy flesh and blood and to get rid of it with a cipher candidate through the packaged media today. The guy that gets elected, as so often the case today, is a product rather than a person. Skeffington is a person, not a product. And in today's world, you're going to see an awful lot of products that come by. There's a line in this film right at the beginning where Skeffington says that he asked the question of the young newspaper reporter, his nephew, what is the most interesting and the most popular spectator sport? Is it baseball? Is it football? Or what is it? And of course he answers his own question and says it's politics. Well, that rings a lot of bells in my head, because in today's world, I really believe that politics has become a spectator sport to such a degree it's become non-participatory. You don't go to the wakes. You don't go out at night, in fact. And a lot of this is attributable in my book directly to the vast and enormous expense of today's modern campaigns for the office of governor or any statewide race, or even in a big city, the office of mayor. You can't compare New York with any other city in this country because it is so much bigger and so much more varied in its component parts and in its people that it's virtually impossible to compare it, or liken it is a better word, to any other city in America or indeed in the world. But nevertheless, a big campaign in today's world tends to be such a spectator sport that you wonder whether anybody's voting. I myself have a theory that one reason that the vote is at a record low in the United States today, it's approximately 52.5% for national campaigns. That was the last record low vote when it was President Reagan against President Carter, 2 or 3 points below what was the previous record low vote, which was 4 years before that. And the statewide so-called off-year campaigns are reflective of almost the same low participation. And one reason I conclude that is true is because of the nature of the packaged campaign. It's all television. People do not go out at night, particularly in urban areas and now suburban areas, for fear of crime. And indeed, the purchase of political television, and we're the only country in the world that does it, and still has the lowest participation of any, is such that it has become a spectator sport to the degree that people aren't even bothering to vote. It's as if it was all packaged. It's a television show and then done, and predictable, predicted indeed in advance. It's if you're looking at a ping pong match or a tennis game, according to the degree of package. It is estimated that the current gubernatorial runs in New York State and California, the two biggest states in the nation where they have gubernatorial campaigns, will be upwards of $10 million for each serious candidate. 90% of that or more is for paid political commercial advertising. And those of us who are New Yorkers in this statewide campaign, whether it's a gubernatorial and a senatorial race, will find ourselves as we head into the fall, towards the primary in September and the general election in November, being deluged in front of our television sets with political paid advertising. It's come to the point that for an intelligent, reasonable representative of the written political press, who's an intelligent old hand at being a written scribe, a reporter. He himself will not take seriously a candidate unless that candidate can show early on that he or she has a multi-million-dollar war chest for paid political television ads, which means, of course, that that candidate will not get serious coverage in the written press because that person cannot be seen as a serious candidate in the absence of that kind of packaged money. That's really the difference between the Last Hurrah period and the United States of America today when it comes to political campaigns. And I think that's what must have been implicit in this film, because it is completely unclear as to why a person who's a decent person and a good chief executive and all the rest of it, without any evidence to the contrary, should be beaten by a person who obviously, according to the film at least, offers nothing. I have to say that there are some representatives of the old school that are left in the United States. From my days as mayor of New York, I think now of another compatriot and colleague of mine, Kevin White, good Irishman, mayor of Boston, now in his 16th year, whose father was of this vintage, who gave out the Christmas turkeys. Kevin is a very modern man in his approach to life, and he surrounded himself with very modern people. Probably has an all-time record in any chief executive situation for the picking of women for key posts. But he's been in there a long time. Henry Meyer, the mayor of Milwaukee, who's been in there for almost 20 years, who's now the grandfather of the business. Curiously enough, another person of Irish background. There are a few others around that are still there, but mostly it's a different and new breed. And for the most part, they are the new crowd is of an entirely different sort than this. Yes, the Last Hurrah way of life is still there to some extent. Good politicians still go to the wakes, they still go to the weddings, they still go to the bar mitzvahs, they do those other things that people appreciate. But they have an eye towards television all of the time. And they become expert, or they have to, on the one-liners. They become expert at knowing exactly how many seconds they've got on the 6 o'clock news. And they know how to time everything that's being done so that it's geared towards television. That, I think, is the big difference in this show and where we are today. I would conclude only by saying that and I think that the day will be coming in the not too distant future, I hope, when we'll see a kind of a return to basics. Television defeats itself in the end. The day of cable is coming. The day of the network is beginning to recede. Decentralization is upon us, and people are paying more and more attention to roots and to neighborhood. And that may mean, of course, that you'll see a resurgence of this kind of approach, which is all to the good. It may even mean pray, tell. It may even mean that we'll see an upward movement in the number of the eligible people who bother to go to the polls. Now over to you, Annette.
Well, it's interesting that, I appreciate what you said. You speak of these as the kind of good old politicians, and it's true that this film greatly sentimentalizes both Edwin O'Connor's novel and probably the original story on which it's based. Is there not an element that, though, is suggested in the film that this is a kind of old-style party boss? I mean, somebody who does both moral and sort of not necessarily moral blackmail? Or is that something that one should assume is so prevalent in regular political life that one should still consider him a good guy without qualification?
Well, no, I don't. I think in today's world, the transgressions that have that occur. The moral transgressions they're not of the end justifies the means type so much. They're personal transgressions. They're the kind of nonsense that you see once in a while cropping up in political life, with drunkenness and the use of drugs and various other things that are destructive. One reason I think for that is that people in public life, for the most part, have finally come to the realization that there's nothing, absolutely nothing, that they can do that's in private. Doesn't matter what it is, a political deal or anything else, it's all going to come out. Some of that was a result of Watergate. I always think of Watergate and the behavior of President Nixon as an attempted coup d'etat by the person who was already in the chair. There nowadays, with things like sunshine laws and other aspects, there is nothing that is private, and I think that strikes not only the fear of God in the politicians, but it changes their behavior, both good and bad. It means it's the ultimate in absence of control situations. There was a time in the Congress or in state legislatures where the speaker or the boss could hammer people into line by blackmail and threat, pressure, persuasion, and, quote, purchase. Purchase in the allowable political sense, a dam here or a highway there or something of that kind. Those things are for the most part gone, which is one reason that political scientists think or believe that there's chaos in the political scene. And I don't think that those things happen. There was a time even when politicians' private lives were off the record. There was a saying in the days when I was even way back in the Congress and whatnot, that two things were okay: booze and broads. Untouchable, largely because the press engaged in both. That was shot out of the water by Wilbur Mills and Ted Kennedy and all kinds of episodes that took place, and the lid was off. And there's virtually nothing that is achievable for political ends, which in this movie would be called blackmail, that a politician would dare pull off, with some occasional exceptions.
You're also painting a fairly bleak picture of contemporary politics in suggesting that unless one has a lot of money and high visibility, a campaign can't even get off the ground. Is there anything that ordinary people like us, for example, can do? I mean, I feel depressed when I hear about this. I mean, what is the way that people can combat this kind of thing?
I think the way it happens is by big movements. I think sometimes it's a bit secular. It's what is the word? Secular?
Cyclical or cyclical?
It's cyclical.
Cyclical.
And we're in a funny cycle at the moment, and have been for a period of time. That may be changing. The anti-nuclear movement is a very real and very deep movement that is worldwide. It cannot be dismissed as a maverick thing or something that's confined to a few people that are way left or kooks or whatever. It's very across the board, it's very real, and it may mean a return to very deep participation and wide participation. That could happen, and I have a hunch that it may happen. God knows if the economy gets any worse, that could add to that. Nobody knows for sure where the economy is going, and I pray to God that it doesn't get any worse and that it strengthens as the economists think it will in the fourth quarter. But who knows what's going to happen? So it's not all a bleak picture by any means. I also feel that I travel the world these days a great deal. I spend a lot of time in Europe, the Middle East, and the Far East, and I've just come back from another one of those trips. And it is true that in the United States that the middle belt, some people like to call it the middle class. I'm never quite sure what that means, but that whole middle belt in the country is enormously strong. It can take a tremendous punishment. It's very resilient. and is very optimistic and cares a lot about what it's doing and about its neighborhood. On the whole, it's reasonably well off. I say reason because in today's economy, nobody's well off. I think everybody's broke. I don't know anybody who's not cash poor and frightened. So I think there's great innate power and strength there. And I also think there are movements beginning to happen in the United States and in the world that may bring back a sense of we-ness instead of me-ness, and a sense of belonging to something rather than total isolation.
Well, speaking of participation, it's probably a good moment to open up to some questions from the audience. Would anybody like to? Yes?
Yes, I'd like to know, do you think that you're talking about the problem of money and campaigning, does this come down to lower levels such as congressional elections and statewide, state senate, or state legislative seats?
Much more than it ever used to. The question is this great power of money come down to more local races such as congressional or state assembly or senate? Not so much, but much, much more than it ever used to. When I first ran for Congress in what was thought to be the affluent 17th congressional district, you were talking about a campaign that was under $100,000 for a lavish campaign for any candidate. Multiply that by 7 or 8 times now for an average congressional district. A congressional district is the last of what I would call the retail stops. Anything beyond that is wholesale, and you're into big television and big communications. So it is not the same problem because of the absence of television that you get in a statewide race. It's really the big cost is television. That's most of it. And the problem in America is that you're allowed to buy it. I have a whole private Lindsay campaign going on, which not too many people are paying attention to see if we can get rid of all paid political commercial advertising once and for all. It's a complicated process.
Do it on television, announce it there. Other questions? Yes, sir, in the middle.
I'm a member of the Common Cause, and one of the things they are now advocating is also the public support of congressional races that they were successful in the presidency. Do you think that to be a correct thing?
Yes. For the back of the auditorium, the questioner is a member of Common Cause, and Common Cause is advocating the use of taxpayers' funds, public monies, as part of to allocate to congressional campaigns. Now it's confined to presidential campaigns as a means of coping with the problem. I split with Common Cause on that, and I guess I split with most. I am not for public funding of campaigns. And the reason is that it escalates upward all the time, and the reason it escalates upward is because of television and the cost of television.
And making people, the candidates, more liable to be bought by these political action committees and the like.
Well, all you're doing is the same problem, because the more money you put in, the more paid television there is what happens. Now it's unlimited. You can buy as much political television time as you have cash available to do it. So I would argue it's just adding in the problem and compounding it. I'm for a system that first of all ends all paid political television, which will cut out 2/3 of the cost of these things. Have an arrangement under which television is available on fair formulas to candidates not more than 6 weeks before an election, which is close to the British system, which will shorten it. I would certainly have no objection to any person buying as much television as he or she wants, attempting to get on the ballot and to become known, as Lehrman has done in this state. Bought up millions of it to become known. But once on the ballot and running, then I would have the formulas apply so that if a poor person with limited resources, should be on the ballot, there would be an arrangement under which he or she would not have to sell his or her soul, which they do now in order to get enough money for political television.
Sir?
As a lawyer, I was wondering whether a plan like that would be constitutional.
Yes, I do. There are First Amendment problems attached to it. And I've always thought of myself as a pro-First Amendment lawyer and argued cases in the Supreme Court on constitutional grounds in defense of that. As you get more and more cable and more channels in the air, my argument gets more difficult constitutionally. Right now, I would handle the problem by adopting the fairness doctrine in television. The fairness doctrine has been there for a long, long time. And it's a doctrine that says that if television puts forward or sells a position that is a controversial position that somebody on the other side can have more or less equal time. It's not the same as 315, the equal time provision, but more or less equal time. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, the tobacco companies were pouring millions of dollars into paid political commercial televisions to run ads that showed that smoking was okay for you, that it was not damaging to your health. Groups like Common Cause, which were just beginning, or before the time of Common Cause, consumer groups were very angry at this. And they invoked what had been in the law for a long time called the Fairness Doctrine, in which they argued that they should have time to respond to this without cost. And under a divided opinion of a federal court, they were given that. They were allowed it. For some reason, it never went to the Supreme Court. And that law is still on the books. Well, what did the television company, the cigarette companies do? They abandoned the television as a result. They said, we're not going to spend millions and millions of our dollars in order to give free time to somebody else who says that smoking is bad for your health without cost to them. So it ended. It was virtually over by that. So I would suggest in a political campaign, changing the federal law by one word, you can broaden the fairness doctrine to a political campaign so that a candidate with a great deal of money, who's a legitimate candidate on the ballot, can buy as much political commercial television as he or she wants. Only thing is, it triggers off the fairness doctrine so that another candidate who doesn't have the money will get more or less the same. Nobody can argue that anyone's free speech has been denied.
Yes.
This question is that in addition to the problem of big money in campaigns, the political action committees have changed the complexion a little bit. I would agree with that. My own theory about the fairness doctrine, which I've drafted legislation on this, it's been introduced into Congress, and I have one very strong member of the Senate who agrees with me on the whole thing. I guess we're going to be doing something together on it. It's Barry Goldwater. And we make an interesting combination because we both agree on the problem. But the political action committees, both labor-oriented and the moral majority types, have contributed to the problem enormously and business organizations, business, labor, and other groups, by being in a position to buy up huge amounts of television. And of course, I don't have to tell anybody here what happened to people like Frank Church and Birch Bayh and others, whose states were literally saturated with television against, and I mean saturated. The airways had little room for anything else. Time was bought up by a political action committee, in that case largely conservative-oriented groups who poured in a lot of effective television. My own little strategy would include that. They would be embraced in that same problem. Those groups would not be prevented from buying television time. The only thing is that a Birch Bayh would get equal time in order to refute it. I am also for, but I just don't think it's politically possible, and may have constitutional problems, First Amendment problems, as this gentleman well knows, over here of enormous proportions, of the straight British system, which just says, no, you can't do it. And television has to give so much time, X time to each candidate, not more than a few weeks before the election, without cost. I'd be happy with that, but I don't think it's doable under our system.
Sir on the aisle in the middle.
What effect have the contribution limits and other features of the new campaign spending laws actually have on the ability of talented newcomers to enter politics and get started in political races?
Well, this is the question is what is the campaign limitation contribution things done? For the most part, that's confined just to federal races. There are some states that have attempted to limit the amount of contributions that a person can give to a candidate, but not many, very few. So you're really talking about federal races. That's Congress, Senate, and President. And the problem there is that the Congress, in the wake of some of the scandals of the Watergate period on elections, enacted this bunch of laws, which I think were entirely proper and right, which limited the amount of money. The trouble is that then the Supreme Court, by a divided opinion on First Amendment grounds, held that that could not be applicable to a person spending any amount of his or her own money. I don't understand. They said on free speech, First Amendment grounds that your own personal wealth is connected with your power to speak and your right to speak. As the contracts teacher I had in law school used to say, I don't see the therefore. I don't understand that opinion at all. It makes no sense to me. But what has happened is that it's put a tremendous premium on very rich candidates who can pour in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into television and into campaigns. If you get a person who can't afford that and is running for office, that person is faced with a situation where he or she is faced with a situation where the most that any person can donate to his campaign is $1,000. Well, that may seem like a lot of money, but for television purposes, it's not so much. So you have to get lots of people each to contribute, if they can, $1,000. There's no such thing as one rich person who can give $10,000 or $20,000 the way it used to be. However, a person who in his or her own right is very rich is free under that Supreme Court decision to spend $2, $3 million, $5 million, whatever it is. And there was an article that appeared in Harper's Magazine just 2 or 3 weeks ago, which is an interesting article pointing out the trend that is beginning to happen in the US Congress, which is that regardless of party, Republican or Democrat, and one or two minor party arrangements, but on the whole, the two major parties, Republican and Democrat both, that increasingly you're beginning to see signs because of that current federal situation of increasingly membership going towards persons of enormous personal wealth as a result.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we return to the days of Mark Hanna, but don't you think it's reasonable for a beginning candidate perhaps to have the ability to get support from a number of mentors who might go above $1,000, say to $10,000 or $20,000 apiece without becoming compromised?
Yes, I think so. That was the case when I was running, so I'm sure it's possible. I am for reducing the cost. I think the number one way to reduce it is to get rid of the possibility of buying television. Another way to do it is to limit the amount of people, the amount of money that can be contributed. If the Supreme Court of the United States is going to stick to its position that a very rich person can buy any amount of campaign media or whatever it takes in a campaign, then I'm for getting rid of the restrictions altogether. That happened after Congress enacted its bill, and I think it's created what could be a very poor situation for the United States, and one which will tend to load the Congress up with persons of great wealth. Good heavens, I'm not against great wealth. I'm doing my best to achieve as much of it as possible right now, after many years of public life. But you not only have, because of the separation of the people from a campaign, which I attribute to the money involved, and the money means television and media. I believe there's not only the beginnings of the separation from people and the process, but I also think that you're seeing a higher and higher level of mediocrity coming into the business, because so many good men and women are immediately not just frightened out of it, but they know because of the money involved, there's no way that they can have a shot at it. So just the opposite is happening of giving a shot at a person, be able to do something because of the knowledge of it. I can assure you that contrary, even all people who are getting on in years like myself and a few other people in this room, not many, tend to look back in the good old days. Well, I really don't look back in the good old days that much. I think there are better movies coming out today than this one that we just saw. So there are better days ahead all the time. But nevertheless, when I was first running for office, I can assure you that the first question that was asked you by an intelligent politician whose help you were trying to get, or a reasonable reporter who you were trying to convince that you were a reasonable human being, the first question you were asked was not, how much cash can you lay on the line? That is the first question today. And if anyone in this room thinks that he or she would like one day to run for the New York State Assembly or the City Council or the Congress or something else, I can assure you that the first question that intelligent political people, whether they're in the media or whether they're in the political process, is going to ask is, how much money have you got? And if you can't lay down a convincing case that you've got a substantial amount, they'll pat you on the head and say, go away. Come back another day, do something else.
Well, we've come to the end of our time, and especially because there are no television cameras here, I'm doubly grateful that you were able to tell us this, and hoping that we'll get more quality rather than quantity. Thank you for coming back to your congressional district, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.